We have three panelists here to join us, who I will let them introduce themselves. Eva, Jenn, and Laura, and then Allie maybe send the first question to you after they do their brief intro. So I guess Dr. Eva first.
Hello, my name is Eva Kostadinova. I'm an assistant professor at Auburn University, and my research expertise is interdisciplinary plasma, so plasma physics at the intersection with other fields. And I'm very happy to be here today with you and discuss a little bit more about the plasma that we work on.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenn Scarborough. So I am the Education and Outreach Coordinator at the MIT Plasma Science Infusion Center. So my expertise is in public engagement and working in informal learning spaces with primarily K-12 learners, but general public audiences and adults as well.
Okay, I'll jump on after Jenn. Similarly, I'm the Education Outreach and Diversity Coordinator for the Future Technologies and Enabling Plasma Processes. It's a handful grant located in the state of Alabama. And I also work with Dr. Eva, but essentially it's a partnership between 9 universities and a corporation in our state. And we do plasma research within the state of Alabama. And my role is pretty much educating the K-12 public, general audience. I help coordinate the internships that we run throughout the summer. That's a little bit about me.
Thanks, everyone. Welcome to all our speakers and welcome to everybody in attendance. I'm Allie Law. I am a program manager at APS in public engagement, and I work on the Science Trust team. And we're really excited to have you all here today to discuss myths and misinformation about plasma science. This is a topic that has come up a number of times in the Science Trust community, as well as in our interactions with APS members. So we thought it would be a great topic to bring to our community hour. But before we dive into questions, we thought it would be helpful to learn a little bit more about who's in the room and your familiarity with plasma science. So I'm going to launch an intro poll in a second, and this isn't a test. This is just for us to help gauge who's in the room. We recognize that people might be coming from different backgrounds and different subdisciplines, and so this will help our panelists gauge some of their responses. So let me go ahead and launch. It's a 4-question poll, so go ahead and take a moment to respond, and then when I see the majority of people have responded, I will close the poll and share the results. So we're asking, how familiar are you with plasma science? Where do you think plasma is most commonly found? Which of the list of statements have you heard about plasma? And then where have you heard or seen about plasma? What sources of information? Right, I'll give 10 more seconds here. We have almost everybody responding. Thank you for participating. All right, looks like responses have slowed. So I'm going to end the poll and let me just share the results with you all. So it looks like about over half of our audience is pretty familiar with plasma. So I take that as we have a lot of folks coming from the plasma community, which is great. But we also have some attendees that are not as familiar. And I'll count myself in that category. I am not a plasma scientist by training. Where do you think plasma is most commonly found? So we have, and I believe this was a check all that apply, but we have some people saying in the blood, In stars like the sun is the winning response, but also in lighting and neon signs. And then some people brave enough to say that they're not sure, which is totally fine. And then what have you heard about plasmas? Okay, so it looks like everybody has heard plasma is a state of matter. Great. Only one person, it looks like, has heard that plasma is only found in space. A little like 60% have heard that plasma makes up 99.9% of the visible universe. Only one person has heard plasma is the same thing as blood plasma. A few people have heard plasma is always very hot and dangerous. And then where are we getting our information about plasma or hearing about plasma? Definitely looks like a lot of people in school or college, but a good number of people on TV, on social media, or other sources. Awesome. Well, thank you all for replying. I think that's going to help us situate our conversation today. So let me kick things off with the first question. So there is, it seems like, some familiarity with plasma science in our audience, but still some more novices. And so I want to make sure we start with getting a common language. So to any of our panelists, can you define plasma physics for the audience?
I can start.
Yeah,
and
go for it.
let Jenn and Laura add to it, because honestly, first thing I'm going to say is I would like to call it plasma STEM almost, or just plasma, right? Because even though we're in American Physical Society here, and I'm part of a physics department, because plasma, as most of our attendees have recognized, is, well, all of them, is another state of matter that leads to plasma physics, plasma chemistry, plasma interaction with materials and material science, plasma as a way to generate energy. So it's, I would tend to just call it plasma because it's a gigantic field. It is a state of matter. And I would say the type of plasmas that probably are mostly kind of the groups of plasmas that we oftentimes discuss can be split by regimes. So we can talk about hot versus cold plasmas. We can talk about plasmas in strong magnetic fields versus ones that are unmagnetized, plasmas in space versus plasmas on Earth, astrophysical plasmas, plasmas that arise in extreme conditions, so they're in very high energy and very high temperature and pressures. Fusion plasmas, those are the ones that are with mentioned have relevance to energy. And there's also a variety of plasma-enabled technology. So this is probably what people mostly familiar with, the plasma screens in TVs. And I'll stop here. Obviously, you can keep talking a lot about it. But maybe Jenn and Laura can add to this.
Yeah, so Eva did a really good job at explaining everything. So I'm kind of representing the role of, I don't come from a physics or a plasma background with my education. I'm more so from a K-6 / communication / marketing. I'm a little bit of a mix of everything aspect of it. So it's been really fun learning about plasma, because one of the things that I enjoy the most is that it's so broad and it covers so many different careers and aspects of science. Like Eva was saying, it's found in space, it's found on Earth, it's found in technology. Plasma can be hot, plasma can be cold. I mean, plasma is a fluorescent light bulb and also the sun. So it really truly is so vast and broad, and it's really impossible to understand. And it's okay if not one person understands all aspects of it, because somebody might be an expert in plasma physics in space, and somebody might be an expert in the agricultural side of it and plasma applications to plants. So it's truly vast, and like I said, I'm here to kind of answer the overall broad questions about plasma physics, but overall it's a very fun and exciting field, and it's growing a lot. And it's something that I've noticed in the just throughout my personal education, I also conducted the survey that you guys all took at the beginning of this meeting with some of my family and friends. So if you guys are all here, obviously you're interested, which is good. And I've also found that lots of people had never heard about it. So when I conducted the survey myself, so it's something that just needs to be made more aware of. It's hard to explain, especially in a younger audience. You know, unlike solid liquid gas, which is very representational, plasma, it's a little bit harder to explain because, you know, I have to use examples like the sun, or I usually bring a plasma globe and show it that way. And then my most common response is, oh, this is magic. So it's definitely a fun, that's a fun scientific field for sure.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you. I did also want to mention that we have a Q&A. So if, as our panelists are speaking, you have a question, don't be afraid to use that. One thing to continue to get people on the same page, can you differentiate between fusion and fission?
Yeah, I can take that one. So we talk a lot with, especially with public groups, about like, what is nuclear energy? And usually when the public talks about nuclear energy, they're thinking of fission. They're thinking of big elements that you pull apart, you take the energy from that. Fusion, small elements that you smush together. And so that sort of thing is really unfamiliar to a lot of the folks that at least come on tours from Schools for Us. They've seen like the nuclear reactor silos, they've heard of Chernobyl, and they don't realize that nuclear energy refers to anything that uses the nucleus rather than just this one very specific process. And so we have to help them understand it's similar in that both of these are physics involving these elements, but the processes are totally different. And so we're not using the same materials or the same facilities, which is part of why fission energy is a reality now and fusion energy is still a research area and not plugged into the grid, because it is a totally separate thing. It just lives under this big umbrella.
I would like to add to this a little bit that from my personal experience, I heard about plasma when I was maybe like 4th grade, but then I heard about the connection that actually fusion and fission are processes that happen in the plasma state of matter. I didn't make that connection until college, maybe even like 3rd year in college, when I was looking at graduate school programs and research projects. So I would say there's also this disconnect typically that people, I've also looked at the curriculum for K to 12, and plasma, if introduced at all, will be introduced in states of matter, versus fusion fission are introduced in topics related to energy or renewable energy or climate. So they're not even in the same subsections of science, and that may be one reason why you know, from our community considers fusion colleagues, you know, plasma and fusion colleagues are the same community. Actually, I would argue, personal opinion, that much more than fusion and fission, versus the common sense is that, yeah, those are all nuclear power plants, weapons, things like that. And typically what I like to give as an example is, for those of you who have watched the Oppenheimer movie, have you noticed when they ask Oppenheimer what is he working on, and he says that he's calculating critical mass for stars to collapse and die. So basically, he's explaining black holes, and he was working on black holes. We know Oppenheimer as the you know the father of the Manhattan Project, and really he was a theoretical astrophysicist, which is studying plasma. And then you have Hans Bethe, who was in that movie, that was the lead of the theory division in Los Alamos. Hans Bethe won a Nobel Prize for fundamental plasma, well, interaction of light and matter. So, and then again, head of the theory for the Manhattan Project. So there was Lisa Meitner, most important example probably, who was the person who explained nuclear fission. Lisa Meitner, this kind of this line of scientists, they were doing this to explain what's happening in space, like where do elements come from, what happens in supernova explosions. So it's kind of like, to me, I just want to emphasize the fact that the astrophysics and the nuclear communities, there is a nuclear astrophysics, and this is the original community that was studying these things. And maybe, we should highlight this connection more often.
Thank you. So now that we've maybe gotten some common language, so we all understand what we're talking about when we refer to plasma science or plasma STEM, I want to turn the conversation to interacting with the public or people outside of the plasma community about plasmas. And so maybe I'll start with Laura on this one, because you do a lot of outreach with young audiences, but I'm curious, what do the students that you interact with, what are they really curious or excited to learn about regarding plasmas?
So I would say, like I mentioned, plasma is something that lots of students I've noticed, at least ones I've interacted with, they've never heard about it. And they've heard the 3 states of matter, and then it stops there. And when I introduce plasma, like I said, I usually try to do it with a plasma globe because it's the most physical representation of it. It's very well received because it's very exciting. And the easiest way that I usually explain it, especially to K through 6, like I said, the younger audience, is I bring a representation of ice cubes as my solid, liquid as water, gas. I usually have like an aerosol spray that's colored and spread into a can so they can see physical representation of gas. And then I say, okay, once you heat gas up, you've got all your stages, and you reheat it to a very, very high temperature, then it becomes plasma. And then I explain plasma in space and how 99.9% of plasma is located in space. My most fun question to ask to the public is, what do you think is the percentage of plasma in space? And I get some crazy numbers, and that's okay, because it's not something that's well educated in school, I believe. And so people maybe say, I've heard responses of, oh, there's no plasma in space, or 20% or 10%. And I'm like, no, it's 99.9%. And people get really excited. They're like, oh, wow. And I'm like, yes, like everything around us is pretty much plasma. So that's kind of how I start the conversation, is having students, or if they're not students, even sometimes the older generations, they still there's that misconception or that unclarity, like, I don't know what it is, or I've never heard of it, or I don't know of a physical example. So I explain something like, lightning, or something that's very concrete that people have at their house, experiments with the energy, bringing a light bulb close to a plasma globe and what happens in the reaction with that. Something that's physical, concrete, I start with that because I find that it's the most relatable. And then if people get interested, I, of course, give them some resources that they can check out. Because like I said, it's a very broad career. So anybody who's got some, STEM interest can relate and apply it to plasma physics, because there is a way. So yeah, that's a little bit about my experience.
Awesome. And maybe Jenn, I know there's a lot of different audiences that go through the museum that you work at. So what have you found visitors are really curious about or asking questions about when they visit your museum?
Yeah, so we do lab tours, and I think the most common misconception about plasma is that they don't know anything about plasma. And so people will come in and just be like, what is happening here? What do you do in this lab? And they sort of start having no idea what's going on. On the other side, we get folks who are like from the industry, who are super excited, and they just want to learn about fusion. And they're like, tell me about this clean energy thing that you are doing very specifically, which we do get a lot of those folks as well. But I think especially for really young audiences, one of the primary concerns of, pretty much everybody under 18, according to national polling, is climate. And so making connections between, hey, this is helping us understand the universe we live in, and this is helping us protect the planet so that we can keep doing that for a long time. This is how this ties together with this thing you care a lot about, has been really successful with our youth audiences, because that starts to be pulling at something that's really important to them. And then all of a sudden they're like, actually, I want to know everything. I thought I knew nothing and didn't care. And now I would like to talk to you for 2 hours, which is not the amount of time we have allotted for them. So that climate tie has been really, really crucial in getting people to ask more questions on this topic they think they don't have a background in.
I agree with everything said. This is really the most common comments we get when we do outreach activities. One thing that I've also noticed is that people fascinated with space, right? So, and then we've discussed like the participants here how you can always get a child excited about stars or dinosaurs. So it's always works. Everybody loves it, and everybody knows space, and everybody knows these beautiful images from NASA, from the Hubble Space Telescope, and now from the James Webb Space Telescope. And it's really captures our imagination. And there's huge exposure of this, and then NASA does not use the word plasma a lot, and it's a little bit of a circular problem because of maybe the misconception. People typically use the word plasma to mean blood plasma. That's on commercials. When I'm on the radio, I hear it all the time. If you want to donate plasma, things like that. So maybe they want to avoid confusion. Also, the term plasma does not exist in standardized K-12, or it's not part of the science standards or things like that. A teacher, of course, can choose to use it and explain it, but there is the language is not there, and oftentimes when we do outreach, we try to convey, well, that's why it's 99% of the visible matter, because you see all of these images of all these things that glow. Well, that's all plasma, and plasma glows. And I think this is one of the aha moments of, okay, maybe I'm not a scientist, but I am now excited about how beautiful this is. This glows. This is very artistic, very imaginative. And I think that's kind of like a one connection that we're trying to build every time is, all these cool things that you know since you could remember, all the stars looking at the skies, that's plasma. All of that is plasma.
Interesting. So it sounds like there's a big opportunity here for plasma and the plasma physics community to be able to drive the narrative and ensure the trustworthiness of the plasma physics community's work with the public, rather than necessarily just going straight in and accepting bad framings that you would maybe think of as just debunking. So what might be an opportunity to build trust and set the narrative that is a good narrative, that might be a good thing that plasma physics could do to head off misinformation before it happens?
I think there's a lot of research in the education space that talks about early and often, the younger children are exposed to content, the more likely they are to want to learn more about it and view themselves as capable. And there is also in sort of misinformation spaces, this concept of pre-bunking. And so giving people like right ideas and letting them know both what is true and what kind of myths they're likely to hear before they start to believe in those things can be really helpful, because it gives people space to be like, oh, I have heard that before. I know it's not quite right. And this person mentioned either what is going on or where I can find out what's going wrong. And I've been told since I was 2 that I can be a physicist if I want to. So I believe in my own ability to do this kind of research. And that kind of foundation is really, really helpful for then having people not only create positive narratives about this, but be really critical of anything that conflicts with the kind of narratives they have and be capable of spotting misinformation on their own.
I also wanted to add the importance of representation. So actually, I get the most excited when I host or go to outreach events and graduate students are with me, because graduate students are a great representation of like, this is a student much, later in their career, and this is what they're studying and what they're eventually like shooting to do for their career goals. And students get really excited and, they look up to people. So graduate students are a great example to kind of explain. And also there's a big misconception that I find too, because I'm based out of the University of Alabama in Huntsville. And with our grant, it has a huge focus on space science. The theoretical portion of space science that not a lot of people know about. That when they think space science, they think, oh, it's an astronaut. They go up there and that's what they do. And I'm like, no, there's a lot of information and background with theorists and, with problems that need to be solved that require theorists. And so that's why I specifically enjoy, bringing graduate students with me so that they can, in a way, explain to their level a little bit about what they do in easier terminology and why it's important, and how the work that they do impacts space missions and space discoveries. So.
Yeah, I'll mention also that building on the education side of things, I definitely agree with the statement that Israeli you introduced the concepts the better, and also that the job market for plasma relevant skills is huge and expanding. I've mentioned that we've considered working with the next generation science standards, which is organization that have developed my understanding in it. It's a group of activists, organizations, even legislators have supported this and developed this, and teaching associations developed the science standards in science and engineering by K-12, and they include specific goals of skills that needs to be developed. And we have colleagues in the community have looked into the standards and realized that every grade you can introduce in a very logical way aspects of plasma, so that it builds up, because plasma is a state of matter. Obviously it's drastically different because of the particles being charged and interacting at a distance and feeling electromagnetic fields and having this complex behavior, right? So, and that gets very, very advanced as an idea. So just introducing it at college level or just saying it's state of matter in school is not enough. So we've looked at down to kindergarten. You can develop an exercise. The science standards suggests that if you do exercises where you study what are the what objects possess properties versus what objects, so for example, a star is emitting its own light versus the moon is reflecting it, and you can just build on this and basically say, well, therefore maybe too far a word for kindergarten, but that means that the star and the moon are made of different stuff, right? And that's even just setting the stage right there, starting to think as the sun is something else, right? And then building and building and building on like across the topics until you hit states of matter, and then you study space physics and you study stars. There is so much opportunity, and the reason why I'm saying this is obviously when we work with teachers, we don't want to come and say, hey, here is this like yet another piece of the curriculum that you need to expand. I mean, they're already overstretched and are trying to do the best that they can. It's more highlight that you actually have heard of plasma. It's into, because it's not logical. It's permeating our life. So you're already familiar with it. We just have never pointed out that this is plasma.
I love all the conversation about how this connects to, the education system. And it's also, I think a couple of you have mentioned how there's really important, implications for clean energy, but also for the job market. And so when we're thinking about, why is it important to address these myths and misinformation other than just, we believe in accurate science information? Can you tell us a little bit about like what are some of the opportunities for the public related to plasma or fusion energy? Why is it so important that we make sure we're introducing people early and often to this topic? I'll hand it to Eva to kick us off, and then we can go around.
Yeah. So, well, I know both, so I can tell you that both Jen and Laura are gonna build on that. On one hand, fusion energy is for the past several years have been experiencing growth because of several breakthroughs in fusion energy science, breakthroughs in technology, the introduction of high temperature superconducting magnets. They have been plasma ignition, which is the criteria for net gain from fusion energy that was achieved in the National Ignition Facility. So there have been breakthroughs, right, that generated excitement. But on top of that, there has been a serious formation of fusion industry, and it has been backed up by public-private partnerships, so funding from the government to basically support startup ideas to become businesses. And a lot of these businesses are also spin-offs of universities. So it's kind of like it's natural growth out of the academic background into industrial. And that kind of also there has been growth all over the world because we see multiple governments now are building power plants, including China, but the UK is very serious about it, Germany, and so some of these countries are more allies to US, some of them are more competitors, but it shows you that there's a global, we know that whenever there is a global interest or competition, that's an important signature of something being on the rise. And whenever there is a private money, it's a signature that this thing can take off from a government-sponsored research lab into something translatable to everyday life. Because again, we scientists, right, we search for proofs of concepts of discoveries, but there is the translational side of these things is very important, and you really need all sorts of additional skills. This is where we think that there is a whole breadth of jobs that will be enabled by fusion energy because it's going to become its own sector. It's not just a line of research that requires lab researchers and technicians. Now it starts engaging, well, first of all, like plasma technology can be used to store and transmit energy from fusion, but also you have supply chain. You also have legislature that needs to go with this, safety. So it's basically it's very special, right? I mean, it's a new form of energy, so it requires that this is not good or bad, it's new, right? So it just requires that things have to be done in a different way. So I'd say the fusion energy is one very practical, very relatable thing that's going on, and jobs are being, the communities have been growing, industries are hiring right now. I would say on the space side of things, and I will end here because I can talk endlessly about these things, but on the space side of things, we've been in similar time frame. Actually, space is ahead of energy in that sense that the space race used to be cross governments, right? And then it moved through public-private partnerships into a lot of businesses. And for the past 24 years, there have been permanent life beyond Earth. So humans living on the International Space Station continuously. And the International Space Station being probably like the most prominent research lab that's outside of Earth, basically showed us that it's possible to live in low orbit. It's possible. The next step will be to build a base on the moon, which is the Artemis mission on the US side, but also multiple governments are going back to the moon. And then the ultimate goal is within the next 5-6 decades will be to go to live on Mars. But in any case, space exploration, we're in this phase of space exploration that's similar to the great discoverers when they were sailing and just expanding the knowledge of what's out there beyond one continent to next continents. And now we're expanding to see if we can live in space. Well, back to our topic, all of space is plasma. So life on the moon requires knowing how to live in a plasma environment. Any life outside of at the atmosphere, protective atmosphere of the Earth requires knowledge of how to deal with this. And we see this understanding now is being translated into plasma propulsion, into dusty plasma on the surface of the moon. That's another topic that we oftentimes discuss. But even down to the very basic concepts of how do you build a circuit on a surface that's completely charged because it's in plasma. How does electricity and magnetism, electronics will work in an environment where you can't have ground? So there's so many fundamental, all of physics, all of engineering, everything that we develop on Earth has been, majority of it is majority of our history, we've done it on Earth, and now going beyond, everything's going to have to be redefined. And this knowledge of what is plasma and charge interacting with materials and people and living matter is going to become huge. And I'll stop here.
I just want to emphasize also with what Eva was saying, and what's I think also really exciting is a lot of these opportunities where both the fusion field is and then thinking space exploration, a lot of the opportunities here, you don't need a PhD in STEM for. There's actually a lot of technical community college training, et cetera, that will be needed in these areas, which I also find super exciting about this, this field. Zach, do you want to voice? I think we've gotten a question or two in the chat.
Yeah, Robert asks in the chat, actually, the question that I had highlighted, you asked a version of it on our question sheet. Have you seen any instances where common misinformation out there about traditional nuclear fission energy has stymied public support for fusion or plasma science? And then I guess more broadly, where do you encounter the misinformation about plasma?
Yes, so much. There are two questions we get on our tours all of the time, and we have a laboratory tour, and then we've got like a diorama of what a fusion power plant might be. That is the end of our tour, that we're sort of looking towards the future. And pretty often people ask me, is it going to explode? Will it explode? Will it be Chernobyl? And that is a question that I get on probably half of my tours. The question I get on all of my tours is what would happen if you turned a tokamak on with me inside, which was a different thing. But that's probably our second most common question. It's like, is this going to explode? Is this going to irradiate my neighborhood? And it's not just from children. We get that from adults, probably more than we get it from children, actually. Kids sort of want to know more about their own body in contact with plasma than anything else. And we definitely see a lot of this fear. And once that first question gets asked, we get a lot of questions about radioactivity. How do we store radioactive material? Is it going to need to be buried in a desert forever? We live in Massachusetts. We don't have a desert to bury it in. What are we going to do with this device we're building? And you start to see this panic build in people as like one or two folks will start asking questions. And we have to sort of talk them down and be like, it's a totally different ball game. We're not working with those materials. The longevity of the radioactivity is very different. What's being irradiated is very different. It's like within a cycle. And so we definitely see a lot of not even the misinformation so much as the panic around it, but to some degree, like the degree of danger is a little bit the misinformation that we see, that folks are like, oh, this is like the most dangerous possible option for us to use nuclear energy. And we have to be like, that's not true of either of us. That's not true of fusion or fission. Like, this is pretty safe. There are a couple of really high profile examples of when it didn't go right, but relatively speaking, this is as safe as anything else we've got going on. And we definitely see that coming primarily in our public tours. It's more when we have structured time for folks to ask questions, when we do events that we're like tabling or doing a workshop that's focusing on a specific aspect, we get a lot less of that feedback. But particularly when we're doing like donor tours, we get a lot of the like, well, how dangerous is this dangerous nuclear thing? And we're like, dangerous and nuclear don't have to go together. It's okay.
Might Jenn just follow up with you on that. So you talked about you know, how you respond of differentiating the two and trying to take the panic down. I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about any techniques you've used when addressing kind of the concerns that people raise on your tours. Techniques either that have been effective or have been ineffective. I think both are good to bring to the conversation.
Yeah, so I've been doing this for 10 years, so I have both for sure. I definitely have things that have worked and things that have not worked. I think the thing that has worked the least is just sort of dismissing it out of hand and saying like, oh, it's not dangerous. People generally don't feel like they can keep asking questions at that point, which then if they have more things they're nervous about, they walk away still nervous and they don't utilize the resource that is talking to folks at MIT to learn that sort of thing. And something that's been really effective is to say sort of like, okay, where did you hear that? Why are you asking this question? Like sort of teasing apart more of what it is they actually want to know. And oftentimes they'll say something like, oh, I heard it on TV. I want to know because I live near Devens, where our research partner, Commonwealth Fusion Systems, is building a tokamak. And we're like, oh, you want to know if you're in danger? You're not in danger. That's a great question, actually. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to ask. Let's talk about what it means for you to live near Devens, Massachusetts. And giving people space to sort of talk through their questions before you tell them they're wrong, then makes them ask more questions. And if I respond by saying like, I understand why you're scared, let me help you with that fear, instead of you are wrong for being afraid, opens up a lot more question lines that then helps them work through it instead of walking away feeling both dismissed and frightened.
I found it personally useful that to try to relate to something known, because when we say, oh, this is very powerful, how powerful? This is radioactive, how much? Like, and typically people will say, well, I want zero radiation, right? And then this is the good moment to start talking about, well, what do you imagine when you say radiation? Like, is this electromagnetic wave, photons, particles, you know, what kind of radiation? And then obviously the sun is making fusion. It is radiating, and our life on Earth is possible because of radiation. So, you know, then we you know, I find it very useful to discuss radiation exposure and what we consider to be normal just from everyday life, from construction, from being exposed, living at a higher elevation. And again, the goal not being to scare people that there is no way around radiation, but to basically to imagine the scales of these things, like how much is much. Or when we say power, I like to give the example of I mean, the physics explanation of how a car works, it's a bunch of explosions in a metal box and you're inside of it, right? So it's rather dramatic, and yet again, we now are very comfortable with the idea that because there is a trust that it works, not even knowledge how it works, right? There is a trust. And this seemed to be where we need to focus attention on, basically just building that trust, without having to. I don't feel comfortable when we do, and I've mentioned this before, when we try to sugarcoat things way too much so that they become not relatable. Yes, there is radiation. Yes, this is nuclear. Yes, it is a reactor that's going to make energy. In the same sense, a fission reactor makes energy. But let us discuss how, like, exactly what is radioactive about this versus fission, or like versus the sun versus the radiation we get every day. And in this way, hopefully build confidence. So this trust through confidence that, okay, I may not be an expert on this, but I know experts. I have somebody to ask and feel and trust that I'm going to get honest response, or I understand enough to decide for myself that I'm not going to freak out about this thing. And that's hard. I'm not saying I know exactly how to do it, but ideally we want to build a honest conversation, because trust requires that, right? Respect for the party, all the parties involved. And as Jenn said, just letting people voice completely reasonable concerns, logical questions, and just discuss, just be honestly discuss, and come up with some not good enough agreement or understanding, so that gives us peace of mind that we know what this is and we can make decisions based on that.
And I'll add very quickly, from, again, a more elementary explanation, but the reason of why we're studying these things is important. And I feel like that needs to be explained more, but also like relating it to, like, again, I go back to the sun plasma example, but like the sun's really hot. The sun, if you look at the sun, is dangerous. If you're outside for too long in the sun, you get burned. It's a big ball plasma, a big ball of plasma that's very extremely hot. I had to have this whole discussion about that during eclipses and how to do it correctly, because if you don't, you could go blind. So there's a reason behind it all. And so explaining the research, why you're doing it, it's exploratory, why we're using these devices or these things, and how that helps us as just in the future generation, and explaining that there's dangerous things everywhere. Like I said, lightning is plasma. Lightnings are not fun. You should not touch lightning. But there's also other forms of plasma that are okay to touch, and like cold plasma, plasma jets. People are terrified whenever I'm like, oh yeah, you can touch this. It's, feel free. And they're like, no, I'm not touching that. Like, it's not gonna hurt you, I promise. So it's just, explaining the science, the physics behind it, and just getting the public comfortable about these explanations.
So, thinking about some of the history that already exists out there, for existing technologies, for example, like nuclear weapons that people are familiar with and have been familiar with and rightfully afraid of for quite some time, or big meltdowns that people may have or remember, depending on whether they watched it in a movie or whether they lived through it. What do people and institutions working within the plasma space or fusion energy space, both scientists and the institutions, need to do, or what goals can we craft to ensure that we are, one, both actually trustworthy, and two, trusted?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the part that Laura just touched on, the explaining why we're doing it is huge, because I do think that there is some amount of perception that, like, and this is, from working with public outreach for a long time, this is not my perception, but there is like an idea that physics is over. We know what gravity is. We've learned all of the things there are, and now we're just like messing around for fun. And we're going to do this really dangerous research for no reason. Or for like our own personal curiosity. And that makes it really hard for folks to trust us, and having people understand why this research is important, how it benefits their daily lives, builds a lot of trust before you even start talking about what the physics is or what the research is helping them understand, like, this is something we're doing because we think it'll help you and your neighbors and the people you care about and the earth we live on. And it's not just because I'm a mad scientist, it's because we think people will benefit from our work. And same way a teacher does their job to help people, a doctor does their job to help people, we are doing this job to help the people in our community. And building that framework makes people a lot more willing to like ask questions and come to the table and say, okay, Mr. Rogers told me to look for the helpers. I can ask you a question now because you are a Mr. Rogers approved person, so you must be safe. And that sort of framing builds a lot of rapport with especially people who have felt alienated by science and physics in particular.
And I can add on that. So in our project, like I mentioned, we work in plasma in a vast variety of ways. And we have a few researchers who work on plasma as far as sterilization. And, this person has tested plasma on salmon to sterilize the salmon. So he took, fresh out of the sea, sterilized it, and then ate it, right? And so that also really, builds credibility of the application of plasma to sterilize things or poultry or food. And if we were to use this in such a field, it kind of expands a whole new, this world is growing. There's going to be more people. We're growing. So we also need to grow our production. And if we don't, there's going to be some negative precautions, like we're not going to have enough food. Or, as far as plants, we have some colleagues that apply plasma jets to seeds to see the effect growth for the rate of growth for the plants. And it's proven that it does work and it makes plasma seeds grow faster. So why is that beneficial? Well, because with more people, we'll need more food, we'll need more plants. So explaining these concepts at, again, much elementary level, but they are important. And it's things that adults, like anybody, lots of people haven't heard about it. So these explanations kind of builds that reassurance of what we're doing is important, and because it affects humanity and Earth and outside of Earth, just us in the future as humans.
Yeah, I very much like this perspectives and agree with them fully. And just to build on that, especially for something like in the energy sector, people oftentimes think of it as a zero-sum game, like, oh, well, either going to do this clean energy versus that. Why not do solar panels or wind or thermal? And the thing is, first of all, you want to have all of those, right? It's not either or. You want to explore all of the possible options. And when we do research, you don't know what you're going to discover. Oftentimes you go in all of the possible directions, and the diversity of opinions and voices and backgrounds and knowledge that gives you that maximizes your likelihood for success in something big and translational and something that's gonna help the world. But also, we're not just working to address existing problems. We are predicting, as Laura said, this is the future, and you're thinking how to fix climate, how to live beyond Earth, how to, if we have this new resources, what else is possible? So it's not a matter of just meeting the current need for electricity or fixing a certain current problem. It's more, well, there's an additional aspect of if we make this work, what can we imagine do after this with this resource that we have? And this is a huge opportunity to engage everybody, right? I mean, going back to the landing on the moon, right? We oftentimes you can hear the conspiracy theorists saying it never happened, or like, why did we have to spend that much money? And like, at the time when you're struggling paying your rent, perhaps it's not your highest top priority that human beings land on the moon and do nothing after that. But looking back in the aftermath of this event, it started a revolution for humanity, right? Human beings achieved this, right? And it to this day brings so much inspiration and drive into not only science and technology, but art and literature, just inspiration of what can be done. And I feel like there is an aspect of what we do that relates to hope and happiness and inspiration. And this is just as important as just solving the specific problem we're working on, right? Yeah.
I love how all of you have turned it to hope and optimism. That was actually going to be our last question about what are you hopeful or optimistic about. But I think tying together another aspect of the conversation when some of you were saying, you approach talking to the public about, some of their fears and misinformation around plasma with asking questions. I really like the idea also of there's so many different examples of how plasma could be relevant to your life, that by asking questions and learning more about who you're talking to, there's a lot of different examples that you can pull on that maybe they don't care about space, but they care about clean energy, or, maybe they care about food safety, right? So that's super, super exciting. Zach, do you have any other closing question you want to ask, or should we?
I can come up with questions all day if you want, but I guess, what do you wish more scientists knew about what you do? Oh, Jen, you're muted.
That's a good question. What do I wish more scientists knew about what we do? I think one of the big things, about what I do is education specific. So more than what I wish they knew about plasma is what I wish folks knew about public engagement around plasma. But I think that the piece of like, you don't need a PhD in physics to be a part of this is a message that I think we could sell even more than we are right now. Because I think a lot of the groups who come in say, oh, this is so cool for someone else to do. I cannot afford to go to college for the next 15 years. And having that aspect of like, there are so many routes into this. You can have a background in English literature and someone has to write our news articles about what's happening. Like, that is a job. You can be the communications director at a lab. You can work in maintenance and have like your high school diploma and build the physical building that we work in and be just as integral a part of the team as a PhD in physics. And I think that piece is really useful in pulling folks in, because it isn't just this like physicist genius stereotype that folks have in their head. It's the idea that like, if you care about something, you can find a way to work in it. And this is a cool thing to care about. There are so many different opportunities.
Yeah, definitely, like I think you nailed it. It's really and this idea that this goes much beyond science and beyond the type of job. This is as it was mentioned, it's every other job. Like, just try to make the world a better place for all the people, and everybody can get engaged. It's not, you don't have to have it as a career path. You can be an enthusiast. You can be at any age, you can decide to just learn more about it. And again, it doesn't take a genius or any special kind of thinking. It's just keep an open mind and find us, and we'll get you in. There is a place for everybody to be engaged in these activities.
And I wanted to add, my two other panelists did a great job wrapping it up. But the key word I heard was communication, because science communication is huge. And in order to get people interested in the field, we cannot just release a research article and just expect people to eventually get inspired. People start at a young age. You know, undergrads are not going to know some of these concepts, and that's okay. And that's for them to, you know, learn and grow and get exposed to the career. So kind of explaining everything in such concepts where your general audience can understand it, and starting from this easy to grasp concept we, you know, mentioned during this this panel is really important, and knowing how to express and communicate all this information to the public so that it's not scary, overwhelming, and makes people run away. So we want to make sure we draw people in and engage them and communicate them with the right terminology.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking the panelists or sending your virtual applause. This was a great conversation. We will post the recording, which I guess I will stop now,